All right, so are you ready to like jump back in time with me a bit?
Always up for a little time travel.
Awesome. Well, today, we're taking a look back at the Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus.
Oh, yeah, the S10 Plus. I remember that one.
Yeah, it was a pretty big deal back in 2019, and we've got this awesome article here that really dives deep into it.
Cool.
So before we get started, what's the like overall goal for this deep dive?
I mean, I guess we want to understand what made the S10 Plus so special, right?
Right, exactly. Like we're not just going to like rattle off a bunch of specs.
Right.
We really want to figure out
Hmm.
what made this phone tick, why it was so popular, and if it like, even
Yeah.
holds up today.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, awesome. So right off the bat, I'm seeing things like an insane camera system, a huge display.
Yeah.
What else was like generating buzz about this phone back then?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head with the camera and the display. Those were definitely some of the big selling points, but the S10 Plus really just went all out on that premium feel, you know?
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, it was like Samsung wanted to prove they could make the best Android phone out there.
So let's start with the display, since that's the first thing you see. I mean, 6.4 inches AMOLED, which for anyone who doesn't speak tech, basically means the colors are super vibrant.
Right.
And blacks are like actually black, not just like dark gray.
Exactly.
And the resolution on this thing was 1440 by 3040. Was that considered sharp back then?
Oh, yeah, definitely. That was like top of the line sharpness.
Yeah.
And they crammed all that into a phone with a tall 19.9 aspect ratio
Wow.
and just a tiny little punch hole for the front camera.
So they were already going for that all-screen look even back then.
Yep. This was before under display cameras were really a thing.
That's so interesting to think about.
It is, right?
So it sounds like they were pushing the boundaries even back then.
For sure.
Did it actually feel futuristic to use, though?
You know, people were blown away by how immersive it was.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Imagine watching movies or playing games on that screen.
I bet it was amazing.
It was, and plus it had HDR10 plus support, so colors really popped.
Okay, I'm sold on the looks, but a phone needs brains too.
True.
It had the Qualcomm Snapdragon 855 processor
Yeah.
and 8 GB of RAM. Was that a lot back in 2019?
It was definitely a lot back then.
Mhm.
I mean, most phones were still coming with like 4 or 6 GB.
So what could you actually do with all that power?
Well, for starters, it was a powerhouse, no question about it.
Oh.
This was like the chip everyone wanted in their Android phone.
Okay.
8 GB of RAM was plenty for even the heaviest multitaskers, you know?
Yeah.
Think about it. You could have a bunch of apps open, be streaming music, and still switch between them without any lag.
No lag. That's the dream.
Exactly. And gaming, forget about it. This phone could handle the most demanding games without breaking a sweat.
Oh, wow. So it was a beast.
Total beast.
Yeah, the camera's triple rear camera setup, which seems almost normal now.
I know, right?
But this was a big deal back then, right?
Huge deal. It was like
Yeah.
suddenly every phone had to have multiple cameras.
And so tell me about this 12 MP main camera with a variable aperture.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one. This was one of the S10 Plus's standout features. Most phone cameras had a fixed aperture, but this one could switch between f1.5 and f2.4.
So what did that mean for like everyday users?
Basically, it meant brighter, more detailed photos, especially in low light.
Oh, that's cool.
And it also had this dual pixel autofocus thing,
Okay.
which meant it locked onto your subject super fast.
Super fast.
Yeah, it was very impressive at the time.
And they didn't just stop there, right?
Nope.
There was also a 16 MP ultra-wide camera and a 12 MP telephoto.
You got it.
It seems like they wanted to cover every possible shot.
Exactly. The ultra-wide was perfect for landscapes or big group photos.
Makes sense.
And the telephoto let you zoom in without losing too much detail. It was like having a mini photography studio in your pocket.
This is making me want to dig out my old photos.
Me too.
Speaking of photos, what about video? Could this phone film in 4K?
4K video at a silky smooth 60 frames per second.
Nice.
And that was on both the front and rear cameras.
Wow.
Really impressive for the time.
Okay, all of this is great, but what about battery life?
Yeah,
A phone's no good if it dies halfway through the day.
right.
How did the S10 Plus hold up?
Well, it had a 4100 millirado battery, which even today is considered pretty large.
Okay.
People were consistently getting a full day of use, even with heavy use.
So no battery anxiety with this phone.
Not really. No, it was a huge relief for a lot of people.
Yeah, that is reassuring to know because I definitely remember like having that phone anxiety back then, constantly worrying about my battery dying.
Me too. It was the worst.
Totally. So a phone that could actually last all day was a huge selling point.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And on top of that,
Uh-huh.
if you did need to top up, it supported fast charging, so you could get like hours of use from just a quick plug-in.
Don't forget about the wireless charging too.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
It even had that wireless PowerShare feature, where you could charge other devices by like placing them on the back of the phone.
Right. Remember how cool that seemed at the time?
It was pretty cool.
You could basically become everyone's best friend at a festival just by having that phone.
That's funny.
It was a clever way for Samsung to like position this phone as more than just a phone, you know?
Yeah, I see what you mean.
It was like a central hub for your whole tech ecosystem.
Okay, before we get too carried away with the nostalgia, let's talk about some of the other features because security was a big thing even back then. So how did the S10 Plus handle that?
Well, it had both an in-display fingerprint sensor, which was still pretty new at the time,
Yeah.
and facial recognition. So you had options depending on like your preference and how quickly you wanted to unlock your phone.
Options are always good. And what about storage? Nowadays, everyone's snapping photos and videos constantly. Was there enough space for all of that on the S10 Plus?
Well, they offered a few different options,
Okay.
starting with 128 gigabytes, going all the way up to 1 TB of internal storage.
Wow, 1 TB, that's crazy.
I know, right? Plus, you could even add more storage with the micro SD card, so running out of space was pretty unlikely.
That's good to know. It sounds like they really thought of everything to make this phone a premium experience. And the design itself was super sleek too, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Glass and metal, that classic flagship look.
They really nailed the design. It felt substantial in your hand, but not bulky. And, you know, for those who wanted something even more exclusive, they had the Galaxy S10 Plus Ceramic Black Edition.
Oh, yeah. I remember hearing about that.
Imagine a phone with a ceramic back panel and a whopping 12 gigabyte of RAM.
12 gigabytes of RAM. They weren't messing around.
Nope, they were serious about performance.
So this was clearly the phone to get if you wanted, like, the best of the best from Samsung. What software was it running when it first came out?
Android 9.0 Pie, the latest Android version at the time. And of course, Samsung layered their own One UI on top of that.
Oh, yeah, One UI. I remember. That was a big deal, wasn't it?
This was the first generation of One UI, and people were excited to see what Samsung would do.
Why was that? What was different about One UI?
Well, before One UI, Samsung software had a bit of a reputation, you know, for being cluttered and hard to use, especially in those larger phones.
Right.
But with One UI, they really streamlined things. They made it much more intuitive.
Oh, okay. So they were listening to what users were saying and actually trying to improve the experience.
Yeah, they definitely put a lot of effort into making One UI a better experience.
That's good to hear. Did it get good reviews?
Oh, yeah, people loved it. It was like a breath of fresh air compared to their older software.
You said it was designed to be more user-friendly, especially on those bigger phones.
Exactly.
How so?
They moved a lot of the interactive elements towards the bottom of the screen,
Oh.
so you could reach them easier with your thumb. And they introduced a system-wide dark mode,
Oh, nice.
which not only looked cool, but also helped save battery life.
Yeah, dark mode is a must-have for me now.
I know, right? It's so much easier on the eyes.
Speaking of must-haves, let's talk price, because this was a flagship phone, so it must have been pretty expensive.
It was, yeah. The launch price was around $999.
Okay, so pretty standard for a top-tier phone, even back then.
Exactly. You were definitely paying for the premium experience, but, you know, you were also getting your money's worth.
Okay, that makes sense. But you were saying earlier that this phone had a real impact, not just on like Samsung fans, but on the whole industry.
It did.
Get it?
So
Well, for starters, it really solidified that trend of triple camera systems becoming like the norm on flagship phones. It showed that you could offer incredible versatility without sacrificing image quality.
It's interesting to think about how that became like the standard now.
I know, right? And let's not forget about that variable aperture.
Right.
That was a feature that was pretty unique at the time.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing that on other phones back then.
And it really helped the S10 Plus stand out from the crowd.
So they weren't just following trends, they were setting them.
Exactly. And then there's the display. The S10 Plus was one of the first phones to really commit to that almost bezel-less look.
Right.
With that tiny punch hole camera cutout.
Okay.
So you could argue that
We can partly thank the S10 Plus for all those gorgeous edge-to-edge screens we see on phones today.
wow, that's pretty cool to think about.
It really is. And let's not forget about the software.
Right.
Samsung's One UI, which debuted on the S10 series, really raised the bar for Android skins. It was sleek, intuitive, and it's still considered one of the best Android experiences out there.
It's wild to think about how one phone could have such a ripple effect on like the entire industry.
It's true. But, you know, the S10 Plus wasn't released in a vacuum.
Right.
What was the competition like back then?
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. What else was out there?
Well, you had the iPhone XS Max from Apple.
Of course.
Always a major player. It had its own strength, like its powerful A12 Bionic chip and its incredible video recording capabilities.
Yeah, the iPhone was no slouch.
Not at all. Then you had the Huawei P30 Pro.
Oh, yeah, that one is interesting.
It made waves with its periscope zoom camera. Remember that 5x optical zoom?
Oh, yeah, I totally forgot about that.
That was pretty mind-blowing at the time. And let's not forget the Google Pixel 3 XL, which was known for its exceptional camera, especially in low light conditions.
So the S10 Plus was up against some serious contenders.
It was a tough crowd, for sure.
So how did it manage to hold its own?
Well, I think it was a combination of things.
Yeah.
You know, the S10 Plus didn't necessarily win in any single category, but it offered a phenomenal overall package, a beautiful design, powerful performance, great cameras, long battery life, and a fantastic user experience thanks to One UI.
Okay, so it was a jack of all trades, master of none kind of situation.
Kind of, yeah, but more like a master of many trades. It was a truly well-rounded phone.
I can see that. So it sounds like it appealed to a wide range of people.
Exactly. It wasn't just for photographers or power users. You know, it was a phone that could do it all and do it well.
That makes sense. Sometimes it's not about being the absolute best in one area, but about offering a consistently great experience across the board.
I think that's a great way to sum it up. The S10 Plus was a phone that just worked, and it worked beautifully.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
But there's still one thing I'm curious about.
Yeah.
We've talked about the specs, the features, the impact.
Yeah.
But what about the design itself? Like, what made the S10 Plus so visually appealing?
The design? Well, this was like peak smartphone aesthetics.
Okay, tell me more.
It had that gorgeous curved glass display that seemed to just flow seamlessly into the metal frame. It felt incredible in your hand. I remember this was back when a lot of phones were starting to have those like awkward camera bumps sticking out.
Ugh, yeah, those were not attractive.
No, they weren't. But the S10 Plus managed to avoid that, you know, keep everything streamlined and elegant.
Yeah, I remember that being a big deal. No one wants a phone that wobbles on the table.
Exactly. So they managed to pack all that tech into a sleek and stylish design. Very impressive.
Okay, so they really nailed it on the design front.
Yeah. They even managed to integrate that in display fingerprint sensors so smoothly. It was positioned just right, easy to reach with your thumb. It's funny how those little details can make such a big difference in the overall user experience.
I know, right? They can make or break a phone.
Totally. And with the S10 Plus, it was clear that Samsung had paid attention to those details.
So it sounds like they put a lot of thought into every aspect of this phone, from like the big flashy features down to the smallest detail.
Exactly. And it paid off. The S10 Plus was a phone that looked as good as it performed.
A true design icon.
Of its time, for sure.
Okay, we've talked about the hardware and design, but let's not forget about the software. How did One UI contribute to like the overall experience of the S10 Plus?
Well, I think this was really the moment that Samsung software caught up to its hardware.
Interesting.
Remember, they'd been criticized in the past for their software being a bit clunky and over-designed.
Right.
But with One UI, they simplified things, made it more intuitive, especially on a large screen. It was a big step forward in terms of user-friendliness.
And you mentioned earlier that this was the first generation of One UI.
Yeah.
It's come a long way since then, hasn't it?
It has. It's evolved, of course, but, you know, those core principles of simplicity and ease of use that were established with the S10 Plus, they're still there.
So in a way, the S10 Plus was kind of a turning point for Samsung software.
I think that's fair to say, yeah, they really hit their stride with One UI, and it's been a major selling point for their phones ever since.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here.
It feels like we have.
But before we move on, I want to touch on something we haven't really discussed yet. You know, every phone, even the best ones, has its flaws.
True.
So looking back now, what were some of the areas where the S10 Plus maybe didn't quite live up to the hype, or where it's been surpassed by later models?
That's a great question, and you're right, no phone is perfect. I think one area where the S10 Plus has been clearly surpassed is in charging speeds.
Oh, okay.
While it supported fast charging, the technology has advanced significantly since then. We're now seeing phones that can charge from 0 to 100% in a matter of minutes.
Yeah, that's true. I remember thinking the S10 Plus's fast charging was impressive back then, but now it seems almost pedestrian compared to some of the newer phones.
Right. And, you know, while the S10 Plus had great battery life for its time, newer phones with more power-efficient processors and larger batteries can last even longer. So battery technology has definitely moved on.
That makes sense. It's like anything in tech, what's considered amazing one year can quickly become standard the next.
Exactly. And another area where the S10 Plus has been surpassed is, of course, the camera.
Oh yeah, the cameras on phones these days are insane.
They are, while it's still capable of taking great photos and videos, camera technology has evolved dramatically in recent years, particularly in areas like computational photography and low-light performance.
Right. We're now seeing phones that can do things with image processing and AI that would have seemed like magic back in 2019.
It's true. So while the S10 Plus's camera was a highlight back then,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily going to compete with the latest and greatest camera phones.
Right. It was great for its time, but time has marched on.
Exactly. If you're a serious photography enthusiast, you probably want to go with something newer.
Okay, fair enough. So it's not the newest or the most powerful phone anymore.
Yeah.
Are there any areas where the S10 Plus still hold its own? Anything that makes it worth considering even today?
Absolutely. I mean, that AMOLED display is still gorgeous.
Yeah, it really was beauty.
The colors are vibrant, the blacks are deep, and it's just a pleasure to look at. And the performance is still very solid. The Snapdragon 855 can handle most tasks without breaking a sweat, even by today's standards.
Okay, so even though it's been surpassed in some areas, like the core experience is still there.
Exactly. The S10 Plus might not be the newest kid on the block anymore, but it can still provide a very enjoyable and premium smartphone experience.
I'm feeling a little nostalgic now.
Me too. It's fun to look back at these older phones and appreciate how far we've come.
Yeah, it really is a trip down memory lane.
Definitely.
But before we get too caught up in the memories, we need to wrap things up.
Okay.
So any final thoughts on the Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus and its legacy?
I think the S10 Plus is a great reminder that technology is constantly evolving, but that doesn't mean those older devices lose all their value.
I like that.
It's like a classic car. It might not be the fastest or the most fuel efficient, but it still has its charm and its appeal.
So even though it's not the latest and greatest, the S10 Plus still has a lot to offer, especially if you can find one at a good price.
Exactly. It's a phone that's worth remembering and for the right person.
Yeah.
Maybe even worth owning today. It's a testament to Samsung's ability to innovate and create a truly iconic device.
Well said. All right. I think it's time to say goodbye to the S10 Plus.
It's been fun reminiscing.
It has, but we're not done with the deep dive yet. We've got plenty more tech to explore, so stay tuned.
Always looking forward to the next deep dive.
Okay, so we're back, and thinking back to like 2019, it really feels like the S10 Plus was like a turning point for Samsung and for smartphones, like in general.
I agree. I think you're right. It wasn't just a bunch of cool features all thrown together. It felt like a statement,
Yeah.
Like Samsung was showing the world, hey, this is what we can do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they were facing some serious competition, too. We talked about the iPhone, Huawei, Google.
Yeah.
Everyone was trying to like outdo each other with cameras and displays and processing power.
It was a really exciting time to be following the smartphone world, for sure.
I bet. Because like every few months there was something new and innovative.
Oh, yeah. Constantly new phones, new features.
It must have been hard to keep up.
It was. But it was fun.
So what I find interesting about the S10 Plus is they didn't just like introduce new tech. It like it made it all work together seamlessly.
Yeah.
It's like they took all the best ideas that were like floating around
Right.
and put them all together into this like one incredibly polished package.
That's a great way to put it. It was more than just the sum of its parts.
Totally. And so as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to like come back to our listener.
Okay.
Let's say someone's listening to this right now and they're thinking, hey, maybe I should track down an S10 Plus.
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
Honestly, I'd say if you can find one in good condition and at a price that makes sense for you, go for it. You'll be getting a phone that even today offers a fantastic experience.
Really?
Oh, yeah. That display is still stunning.
Right.
The performance is smooth, and the camera is more than capable for like most people's needs.
But would you recommend it to like someone who's really into mobile gaming or wants like the absolute latest camera tech?
Probably not. If those are your top priorities, then you're probably better off going with a newer phone.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But for everyday use, for someone who appreciates like a well-designed and well-made device,
Yeah.
the S10 Plus is still a really solid choice.
And it's a piece of like tech history too.
Oh, for sure.
A reminder of how far smartphones have come in just a few short years.
Absolutely. It's kind of fascinating to see how some of the features that seemed revolutionary back then have become so commonplace now.
Totally.
Makes you wonder what the next big leap will be,
That's a great question to ponder, and I think that's like the perfect note to end on.
Yeah, I agree.
So thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus.
It's been a pleasure.
It has. And to our listeners, thanks for diving in with us.
See you next time.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the fascinating world of technology. Until then, stay curious.